Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
It's great to be here. How are you today?
Ji, thank you so much. Ji, Ramona ji, please let us know to our viewers about the current situation. The government of Canada has reduced the gas taxes till Labor Day, but some experts are saying still ongoing negotiations are not, there are some shipping problems, so the gas prices might reach at the international level. So what is your take?
Yes, we had the Prime Minister Carney introduce a gas tax until Labor Day of this year, and this gas tax will start as of Monday, April 20th, about 10 cents on gas per liter and 4 cents on diesel. This is supposed to give some sort of immediate relief to Canadians, but we know that the prices have gone up. We know that since this war started on February 28th, between United States, Israel, and Iran, we know that prices have gone up sometimes 50 cents, 70 cents over week by week, escalating in certain parts of Canada, even going up to almost the $2 per liter amount. So that's serious. And with that, now we have the latest announcement by grocery stores saying that they're going to add this tax on when it comes to items. And so, and that might fluctuate because they're saying that they're being exposed by transportation costs, which use gas to transport goods to the grocery stores. And essentially, they're saying that they need to pass that price to the consumer. So what that means is the Canadian consumer is not only paying high prices by filling up their gas to go to work, take their kids to school, be part of the economy, but that also means that they're paying the extra taxes that are going to be on the prices that are going to increase on the goods that they consume. So the trends are, showing that, and it is getting much, much harder. Even though this gas tax that the Prime Minister has introduced, it's still not enough to make life more affordable here in Canada. And when it comes to why this has started, well, it started because of the war in Iran with U.S. and Israel forces. If you recall, that war started on February 28th. Prior to that, there was a few days where there was negotiations taking place, and Oman, who was mediating the negotiations between Iran and the United States, said that they're going to reach an agreement when it comes to Iran's nuclear enrichment. And of course, then we heard from the president saying that there was a sudden strike on that February 28th, killing the Ayatollah of Iran and high officials of the Iranian regime, which sprung this war that went on for 40 days. Right now, we are in a ceasefire situation, but it is fragile. So what's happened since last weekend in Islamabad, when you had Vice President J.D. Vance meeting with the Iranian delegation, they did not come to a deal. It did not mean that it was the end of negotiations. But since then, President Trump had announced a U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. That is after Iran said that the Strait of Hormuz is open for civilian traffic and not anything other than civilian. And if there is a blockade by the U.S. forces, then it will retaliate by attacking the ports of the GCC countries. That has now changed since there has been a blockade by the U.S. naval. Iran has shifted its strategy by saying it's going to block key trade routes due to the Strait of Hormuz blockage. So what does that mean? So we saw that since Monday, President Trump ordered those U.S. naval blockades of Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz, essentially disrupting Iran's ability to export its oil to key countries like China, Japan, South Korea, India, essentially saying that we want to add pressure on to be able to go to the negotiation terms and have leverage in that sense. We saw in the last negotiations, Iran had that leverage to a degree because of the Strait of Hormuz being a main sticking point on this war that President Trump was trying to get a ceasefire on. Now, if you recall, when the war started on February 28th, it was because President Trump wanted to change the regime. And then it was President Trump wanted to extract the enriched uranium in Iran. And then that changed to opening up the Strait of Hormuz. And so now with the blockades there, Iran is responding by saying that it's in retaliation, it's going to shut shipping across the Persian Gulf, the Sea of Oman, and the Red Sea if the U.S. naval blockades continue. So this isn't just the Strait of Hormuz, which has been the main sticking point in this entire war. This is now escalating to what would be the Bab el-Mandeb, which is the Red Sea entryway. And of course, it covers Europe, Asia trade routes, which also affects the Suez Canal in that sense. What does that mean in terms of numbers? Well, we know that 20% of global oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which is about 20 to 21 million barrels per day moving through that Strait of Hormuz. And we know that that had gone virtually shut during this 40-day war that took place between US, Israel, and Iran. And that is 25% of the global seaborne oil trade, which has been at risk. And that's also 20% of global LNG, which passes through the Strait of Hormuz. This disruption has affected both oil and natural gas markets. And when it comes to the Red Sea route, which is what Iran is now saying in retaliation to the U.S. naval blockade, it's essentially the Red Sea handles 10 to 15% of global trade via Suez Canal, and that is critical, obviously, for the European nations who rely on energy corridors from the Middle East and that entire region. When it comes to Bab el-Mandeb, that's 12% of global oil shipments, which Iran is also threatening to be able to shut down in response to the U.S. Now, if this continues, we're looking at a massive escalations because during this entire time, we saw a 70% decline in tanker traffic. And this caused many countries who rely on oil from that region to essentially use their reserves and asking their citizens to scale back when it comes to traveling to work and their consumption. So we've seen that play out since the beginning of March. Now, prices of oil did surge above $100 per barrel, which is something that President Trump has tried to keep down. We saw at the highest peak at $117 per barrel. So now this conflict is not just a conflict between Israel, United States, and Iran. This has now become a global energy security crisis. And of course, let's not forget the fertilizer that comes out of that region, which many countries, as well as Africa, relies on for their crop production for domestic consumption. Now, there has been disruptions that have been driven because of this war. We've seen higher shipping insurance costs, right? Essentially, the companies that insure these naval vessels, they have to increase the insurance costs because of the risk that these vessels are in that Strait of Hormuz and surrounding region. And we know that there's been up to 2,000 abandoned vessels in the area because of these disruptions. So the supply chain has created these delays, which the IMF is calling potential inflation risk and slower growth when it comes to the global economy. Now, the numbers as of April 15th, 2026, when it comes to oil prices, it's trading at $90 to $96 per barrel, with West Texas Intermediate trading at $91 to $92, Brent crude at $94 to $96. And we've seen this slight volatility during this period. And when you compare it to the price of oil from a year ago. So what is the bottom line? The bottom line is that essentially Iran is threatening global recession. That's what it's doing as a leverage point. It's targeting its core arteries when it comes to global trade, but with the Red Sea blockage, with the Strait of Hormuz, which affects energy, triggering major oil shock, inflation, and global market instability. And we're seeing the responses of that. Now, while this is taking place, today, Pakistan's Army Chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, has landed in Iran as a part of delegation to continue the high-level talks on resuming the talks between the United States and Iran. Now, they are saying that nothing has been halted. It's just they didn't come to an agreement when they met over the weekend. Essentially, United States going more on a hard line of saying that Iran should not enrich its uranium at all for a 20-year period. Iran said that it does have a right to enrich its uranium for civilian purposes, and but not have nuclear weapons, which is what President Trump's stance was prior to negotiations. So a little bit more hard line, and therefore they did not come to an agreement. Now there is speculation that there will be second round of talks. We heard that from Vice President J.D. Vance, but now President Trump is also saying that the war is close to over, hinting that the second round of talks could happen within days in Pakistan again. So, of course, we're going to let you know the latest details once we know what that means. But when it comes to what we're hearing from each side about what happened in the Strait of Hormuz, you have this entire U.S. blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is conducted by CENTCOM, which handles the military operations in the area. So essentially, what they saw is that even though the blockade is taking place of the Iranian ports, when it comes to ship tracking to see what's happening in that region, which we can see what's going and what's not, we have that ability to have that satellite imaging. It's observed that a couple of ships have managed to exit the Iranian ports, so it's not a complete shutdown. And we're talking about the involvement of 10,000 airmen, Marines, sailors, and at least a dozen boats and dozen aircrafts are in that area patrolling. So it's a very high activity and very fragile in that sense of the ceasefire. Now, meanwhile, if you recall the 10 points that Iran had put forward to President Trump for that April 7th ceasefire agreement that they all came to terms with, one of those 10 points was that the ceasefire would include what's happening in Lebanon with Israeli forces. Essentially, for weeks now, Israeli forces have gone into southern Lebanon with their fight against Hezbollah, and now they're planning on essentially occupying southern Lebanon. And so this has been continuing. The Israeli strikes in Lebanon have continued, and to that, Hezbollah has responded that they're saying that even though right now we're talking about peace negotiations or some sort of an agreement between Lebanon and Israel, Hezbollah is saying that they're going to continue with fighting their forces. Now, there is a possible short-term ceasefire in Lebanon that both sides may be talking about. We know that these talks are taking place in Washington this week. We don't know the full outcomes of it, but the U.S. is signaling that conflict may be close to over and saying that military activity will, might continue, but it's one of those gray areas that we're not getting a clear distinction of what's happening. We saw that happen in this 40-day war between Israel, United States, and Iran, where United States was saying it's speaking to high-level officials in Iran, and Iran was saying, no one's speaking to us. So we're going to continue keeping track of this. But what does this mean so far on what's happened in Lebanon? Since early March, in this war has caused about 2,000 deaths in Lebanon, and about 1.2 million people have been displaced from their homes. Essentially, once when they fled, they are not able to go back in. I have friends who have family in Lebanon, and they're saying the same thing, that some just had to evacuate their buildings, by given, just an hour's notice by the Israeli forces to evacuate. And really imagine just collecting a few items and not having a home to return to. Some of these people are living in tents, cannot go back into this area. So it is devastating. Every single day, this is escalating. One of the biggest strikes that killed Lebanese people was in one single day was 250 people that were killed during the intensity that remains high between this war that takes place in southern Lebanon. So now officials are saying that there's no confirmed end date to this conflict, and the duration is unknown. This has been one of the key factors, what Iran had proposed to the United States for the ceasefire. So we'll see if that continues being part of the conversation when United States and Iran resume their talks. And when it comes to the area of what's going on, well, we have the United Nations interim force in Lebanon saying that their convoy that was heading to the region in conflict was turned around by Israeli forces. Essentially, the UN peacekeeping mission in southern Lebanon sends routine convoys transporting military and as well as civilian peacekeepers from Beirut, the capital, that has also been struck during this conflict. And they reported that they were stopped by Israeli forces just a few kilometers away from their headquarters in Nakura. Now, the UN marked vehicles were allowed to proceed while local contractors were turned back despite their route and timings that had been previously confirmed with the Israeli army. The UNIFIL says that this is not an isolated incident, essentially going on the record with their statement saying that similar restrictions through physical roadblocks or the reversal of prior clearances have affected both peacekeepers and essential personnel to support them. And we're talking about items such as critical supplies of food, fuel, water that is provided to the region. So that's what is happening according to reports. And when it comes to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, well, the chief is calling for an international community to provide urgent support to Lebanon, essentially saying that as Israel battles the country, more than 1 million people are displaced, saying, and this is a quote from the chief, Barham Saleh, saying that I call upon the international community to provide urgent support and relief to Lebanon, saying that this is after his conversations with the Lebanese prime minister, saying that the humanitarian consequences of this war are immense, and I emphasize the need to spare civilians and civilian infrastructures from the ravages of attacks. Lebanon does not deserve to be trapped in a reoccurring cycle of violence. Now, it deserves support and stability, is what they're calling out for, and this is to be seen. And when it comes to U.S. politics, well, the Democrats have filed 5 impeachment articles against Pete Hegseth. He's the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense. The House Democrats essentially introduced 5 separate charges against Pete Hegseth tied to the war in Iran and the broader conflict that we've seen escalate in these past few weeks. Now, the charges are focusing on Iran war conduct. Essentially, the allegations include that unauthorized military action was taken against Iran. If you recall, there was no discussion of it in Congress. It was not approved. It was a sudden attack that took place on February 28th. Essentially, Democrats are saying that this is a violation of laws of armed conflict, and because of that, there's been many civilians that have been harmed. The numbers are in thousands, and of course, that is in Iran, in Lebanon, Israel, U.S. soldiers killed, as well as the GCC nations in civilian harm. And essentially saying that Pete Hegseth mishandled sensitive military information. So the article is alleging that there's blocking congressional oversight by Pete Hegseth, withholding key details on operations, claiming that sharing sensitive information in unauthorized communications. So whether we're talking about, if you recall before, when they used, a social media app to communicate amongst themselves, so whether that's part of it, saying that it's raising security concerns. Now, these efforts from the Democrats may have little chance of passing. What this is more significant in what the Democrats are now targeting, as opposed to President Trump really targeting his, inner circle. So why would this have a hard time passing? Essentially, Republicans are controlling Congress, and the conviction will require 2/3 of the Senate vote, making it highly unlikely that Pete Hegseth is going to be going through impeachment. But this also shows that they're moving in on key figures in the Trump's administration as a strategy to show that they need to, pull some levers. It is a midterm year. We are seeing the Democrats doing fairly well in some key seats when it comes to a district in Florida where Mar-a-Lago, which is the president's home, essentially when he's not in the White House, is in Mar-a-Lago. That district went Democrat, and that is a key Republican district. So we're seeing a wave shift. Now, when it comes to what it means in terms of the global impact on the economy, we're seeing investors are shifting away from the Gulf region, like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and shifting their investments to Asia due to war risk. So now these investors are diversifying their portfolios away from the Gulf region towards Asia, and particularly in Hong Kong, seeking security during these uncertain and unstable times during the war that involves Iran. Now, what is the trends that are seeing? Well, there's, essentially investors need a safe haven like Hong Kong, and it's appearing to be a little bit more attractive as some capital is moving there when it comes to gold and cash. Now, the Gulf outlook doesn't look so well, even though the Gulf states have been a key safe haven for investments for decades now, or a better part of a decade. But what's happening is that they're now reviewing the investment pledges and potential force majeure because of this financial strain. So the Gulf region has been impacted. Their major source of revenue is oil. We've seen that's been impacted through this war because of the attacks from the Iranian side, as well as the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz.
Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.